Hey, Freight Pod listeners. Before we get started today, let's do a quick shout out to our sponsor, Rapido Solutions Group. Rapido connects logistics and supply chain organizations in North America with the best nearshore talent to scale efficiently and deliver superior customer service. Rapido works with businesses from all sides of the logistics industry. This includes brokers, carriers, and logistics software companies. Rapido builds out teams with roles across customer and carrier sales and support, back office administration, and technology services. The team at Rapido knows logistics and people. It's what sets them apart. Rapido is driven by an inside knowledge of how to recruit, hire, and train within the industry, and a passion to build better solutions for success. The team is led by CEO Danny Frisco and COO Roberto Acaza, two guys I've worked with from my earliest days in the industry at Coyote. I have a long history with them and I trust them. I've even been a customer of theirs at Molo, and let me tell you, they made our business better. In the current market where everyone's trying to do more with less and save money, solutions like Rapido are a great place to start. To learn more, check them out at gorapido.com. That's gorapido.com. Welcome back to another episode of the Freight Pod. I'm your host, Andrew Silver, joined today by a special guest, Mr. Andrew Leto. Mr. Leto, how we doing?
Great, thanks. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. This is you have one of the more illustrious freight careers of any of my guests thus far. So I'm excited to kind of dive into your journey, and I think it makes sense to start. Just take us back to what even brought you to freight to begin with. How'd you find this fun industry?
Yeah, so when I was younger, my dad was a franchise owner of a company called Pilot Air Freight, which is still around. He was a Phoenix office, and I remember going to his office, and I always told everybody my dad's in the freight business, kind of like you were brought up, and but my dad didn't own any trucks, own any planes, so I was like, "How does this work? How are you in the freight business if you don't own anything?" And I went to his office one day and he showed me, he just showed me how shippers call him up and he goes through a bunch of books, ACI guides is what they're calling the air freight business. And Forward Air is what they put most of their freight on. Actually, it's kind of funny. They sell expedited services, but it's mainly on trucks. Most air freight's on trucks. It's just faster trucks, team drivers. But he showed me how you could just connect shippers. He picked up the phone one day. He's like, "Hey, watch this. I'll make $100, $200." And he just was giving quotes out, looking in books, and then adding a margin to it. And so at a young age, I figured out, wow, this is how you can make money in freight without owning anything, by being the middleman, essentially. So that's where I got my first exposure to that.
So did you work for him, or what was your first actual job in freight?
Yeah, so as a teenager, I worked in his office. I worked in the warehouse mainly. I didn't do anything great, and he was mostly using typewriters and stuff. So I went to after I was not an academic. I had ADD, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I do. And I couldn't pay attention to school, so I didn't have the grades to go to college. So I went to the Navy 5 years, from 2000, from 96 to 2001. Did 5 years Navy. And when I got out again, I started working for my dad again after that. But my last year in the Navy, I was like, okay, I'm going to be so far behind all my friends who went to college. And I was actually going to the Navy to get a college degree, the GI Bill, to go get to have something to go pay for college. And when I got out, I worked for my dad for about 3 months. But that year before I left the Navy, I just studied every business book I could get my hands on. I went to Barnes & Noble at the time and went to the business section and read every great book on business, or I was like, I got to at least figure out how to be an entrepreneur or make money. So I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad to Think and Grow Rich, which is my favorite book of all time. And it really I didn't realize this, but my last year when I was doing all this, I didn't do anything but read for like last year of the Navy, just constantly. But when I went to work for my dad after I got out, because I worked for him when I was younger, I saw it's 2001 and we're still using typewriters, and companies would call him up and say, "Hey, give me a quote on this," and he would go through a bunch of books and at 35, it was a 35% margin business, the air freight business back then. But there was not a lot of shippers for it. And also it was after September 11th, so you really couldn't get new shippers because there was this thing called known shipper where you'd have to go out and to get a new shipper was really hard. So I was, and then one day I remember someone called our office and was selling stuff on eBay. And I told them, I said, listen, bring it to a terminal. Don't have a liftgate residential come out. That's going to cost you a fortune. He was selling an ATV. And he says, okay, I just sold it to a guy. How do I get it to him? And I told him, I bring this to Ford Air Terminal. I told him how to package it and have your customer pick it up there. And he called me back an hour later. He's like, well, you're the cheapest quote I got. And I knew I was because when everybody else was giving them residential lift gates both ways. So that guy, and he also prepaid us on PayPal, which was awesome. I was like, wow, this guy's actually prepaying us. So I told my dad, I was like, Dad, we should advertise online and just see if we get people from eBay to use us. And we did that for a little bit. And I remember someone called me up one day and he said, hey, listen, I got a quote from someone just as good as you, or actually it's better. It's much easier to use them. And I said, what's that? And he goes, freightquote.com. If you remember freightquote.com, it's now part of C.H. Robinson. But they were freightquote.com was one of the first Travelocity orbits or price lines for what essentially is LTL. Not really for truckload, but for LTL. Mm-hmm. And I said, I saw the system. I saw freightquote.com and I saw all the carriers lined up like you would on Travelocity orbits or Priceline, just like you would book a hotel or book a plane. And I was like, I told my dad, I said, this is the future. I said, we got to do this. And he wanted nothing to do with that. He could care less. He was like, go out, put a suit and tie on and go out and sell shippers to call us up and do it the old fashioned way. That's all he knew. And I said, we got to invest in this. And he didn't do it. So it was literally 3 months after I started working for my dad. And I really, after reading all these business books, it was like kind of like the Matrix when I worked for him. I was like, before I read all this stuff, I didn't see it. But when I started working for him, I was like, this is crazy how he's doing it and how this whole industry works. It's, where people have to call you up and get a quote. Why don't they just go online and get a quote? So I left my dad after 3 months of working with him, and he didn't really talk to me for the only person in my family that talked to me at the time was my mom for about a year. And my dad thought I was going to compete with him. He's like, what are you doing? But anyways, that's how I started GlobalTrans. I left my dad's office one day and I said, okay, I'm just going to start a company. And I had $0 to my name, zero. I had an unemployment checks from the Navy. That was it to live off of. And that was only for 6 months that I would get that. So after about 3 months of working for him, I said, I'm going to do this. And I just remember the guy on eBay calling me up and saying, hey, would you ship this for me? But I remember mostly as he prepaid me. So I was like, wow, if I could get prepaid from people, I don't really have to have money to start a business. So I went out, started Global Tranz. What I did was I just went on eBay for about a month and just emailed everybody that looked like they're selling something that wouldn't go UPS or FedEx or parcel. If it was bigger than 150 pounds, I would say, hey, give me a call when you want to ship this. I went out and got one carrier relationship. And I knew the cheapest at the time was a company called Central Transport. They probably still are. And I remember only seeing that because when I went to freightquote.com, they were the cheapest carrier every lane. Worse service. I don't know if they've gotten better, but back then it was really bad. But it was half the price of anyone else. But I was also thinking, if I just could tell all these people go to the terminal and have to deal with liftgate residential, it doesn't really matter. I mean, you're not going to have as much problems with the shipment if you're just using a terminal.
Well, they'll save so much. And for this kind of thing, it's not like most of like someone's buying an ATV. Do they care if they get it in 3 days or if it's 2 weeks? Like, I feel like back then, if you're shipping something on eBay, you didn't need it to be there by a certain time. So you could probably get away with the worst service as long as as long as the price was right.
Right. And that's what it was. I mean, they still mess up a lot of shipments, but it was still worth it in the end. And then, so what I did was I went and met the guy for lunch, the guy here in Phoenix. I said, hey, I need credit. And he wouldn't give me credit right away. So he said, I'd have to prepay every shipment. So after a month of emailing everybody on eBay, I probably sent out like 10,000 emails to people. I was starting to get calls every day. Hey, I'm ready to sell this. You said you're gonna give me the best freight rate. What do you got? And I would just go on. I got the same tariff as Freight Quote at the time. Because they just got to Phoenix and they wanted my business. And they gave me the same pricing, which was amazing. And they didn't give me credit right away, but after a week of having to call them every time I had a shipment, they gave me credit. But anyways, what was nice about that, after a month, everybody called me. I was the cheapest because everybody else would try to go on, call FedEx or UPS or even go to freightquote.com, but not know like the whole just bring it to the terminal thing. They would just put the people's addresses and they were like, so I knew that if I could get everybody to bring their freight to a terminal, I would be the cheapest, especially using central transport. So after about a month of doing this, I remember I had $0 my name. After about a month and a half, I had about $200,000 in my bank account because remember I was getting prepaid for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was making 30% margin on it, 40% up, something like that at the time. And so I owed Central Transport 120 grand of it. Luckily, they didn't want they were so back. They would call me like after 60 days for the money. So I actually had 2 months of credit for them. And at that point, I just hired a bunch of my friends. I said, my best friend, who was my co-founder of Global Tranz, I was living at his house. He would email all the people on eBay. And then I had another person that would do the bookings. And then another person explain to the shippers, do the quoting, and then another person do the billing. So I had like 4 or 5 friends working for me after about a month. So I only had to do really 1 month of work. And then I became a master delegator after that. But after about a month, I said to myself, I need to build what FreightQuote has. I mean, I always knew that. I was like, I got to build what they have. So I went to online and I bid it out with a bunch of companies. Actually, Jet was talking about the guy last week on your podcast. His name is Abhishek. He reached out. I went on this company called elance.com. I put it out there. And he was the lowest price for it. And
you're saying to build the actual website?
Freightquote.com. I was like, hey, build me this. And it was funny at the time, I didn't even know SMC3. For about 3 months, I was trying to figure out how to do it. I would literally mail to India, because that's where I was building it out of, all the rate discs from all the carriers. So back then it was like Watkins and Central Transport and all the companies I would try to get rates with, LTL carriers, and I'd email them discs and they were like, we don't know what to do with this. They were trying to piece it together through the discs. And then I finally called SMC3 up to buy more discs. And the guy's like, what are you doing? Why do you keep buying all these discs from us? I'm like, I'm trying to build what FreightQuote has. He's like, oh, you just need a rate view product. So there was a product out there that they were using. So I was like, oh, tell me about this. So after I figured out rate view and all this, I bought that product. It was either Carrier Connect or Rate View, one of those two. And we built my first carrierrate.com, which was what we used at GlobalTrans, which was like pretty much the second. It was us and FreightQuote and then Unishippers were the only companies that had, a place where you could go online and do, and kind of like Travelocity or Orbitz for LTL. And after about 2 years of doing it took me about 2 years of doing what I was doing on eBay to get the system ready. And then once I had the system ready, I was like, oh, I can go get actual shippers now that I have this. But I was like, I have no capital. And there was no capital at the time. Like only FreightQuote got invested in until probably about 2010 in our industry. There's no other big investments in our industry from anyone. And so I was like, there's got to be a way. How do I sell this to shippers without having to hire a massive sales force? And that's where I came up with the idea. I was like, wait a minute. I said, Dad, how did it work with Pilot Air Freight? And he told me, he's like, Pilot Air Freight would do the billing. They would do all the back office stuff and we would just go sell it pretty much. It's how franchise models work for air freight. And I said, ooh, I wonder if I could do that for LTL. So I said, and I remember meeting a couple of my reps here in Phoenix, and two of my best reps, Jet McCandless, who you talked to last week. He was my YRC rep here in Phoenix. Mm-hmm. And then Mike Bookout, who runs a company that I have, it's called My Carrier. They're actually in a legal dispute right now between the two of them. But those were my two best reps in Phoenix for LTL. And I literally asked them, I said, hey guys, if you had this, and I showed them, I said, here's carrierrate.com, looks just like FreightQuote. We had about 6 or 7 carriers in there. We had Central Transport, Old Dominion, and a couple other ones. A couple of regionals in there that were giving us some rates. And I had at the time, honestly, I had to say I was a shipper to get rates. LTL carriers hated brokers back then. They still don't like them, but they at least deal with them now. But back then it was like, it was very hard to get rates for LTL. Mm-hmm. We managed it. It just took time to keep it. Obviously, we're doing so much business that we kept them. But I asked Jet and I asked Mike Book, I said, if you had this and you brought this to your shippers, and I think both of them had like $5 to $10 million books of business here in Phoenix. They were local reps. I said, how many of your customers would use this? And they said, this, probably half of them would use this. They would love to have something like this. because it was 2002, three when that was like a new thing. And I said, um, so I hired both of them, and they both brought in millions of dollars of business, like in the first year of LTL shippers. And we'd make 20, it was a 20% margin business. So if someone had a $10 million book of business and they brought 1 million of it over, that was 200 grand a year we were making. And, he could make up, we would give half to the rep and half to the company. So at that point, I was like, wait a minute, this makes total sense. Why not have an agent model? I didn't know at the time I was trying to do a franchise model, but agent's much easier to put together. We did an agent. We're the first ones to do an agent model for LTL. And what we did is we picked our carriers. We picked the ones that we wanted to do business with. And then we went after the reps for the rest of them. It's like YRC, we didn't do business with them. So we went after YRC reps. And the agent, the call would be, hey, how much do you manage for YRC? And they'd be like, oh, we have a $10 million book of business here in Dallas, or 20 million. We show them the system and they'd say, hey, if you brought just $1 million of that over, you'd make 100 grand a year. And that's what they were making typically. So, and after that, you make 50%, let's say you brought $2 million and now you're making an extra $100,000. So really, so I used my two reps, who are actually two of the best recruiters in the industry now, are KJ McMasters and Brent Orsuga were my two guys that did that. And yeah, they would just recruit agents all day for Global Tranz. And after so that's how without any capital, remember I had $0. People say you need money to make money. I had $0 in my name, and I started GlobalTrans with zero, but also was able to, build it to what it was when I left. It was $500 million. But just using, I had to figure. I couldn't hire a bunch. If I could have hired a big sales force, I wouldn't have done the agent model. But the agent model just worked out great for LTL because it was a new thing back then. And so that was the first 5 years of GlobalTrans, and then about 2010 is when we decided to get into Truckload. And that's when everything changed for me personally, because I was like, wow, this is way cooler, way harder to do, but I thought way better than LTL. It's a way bigger industry. And actually meeting your dad was really what showed me how the industry works. And I was like blown away when I first met him in 2009. And I met him in Chicago with Jet.
Yeah, and Coyote was 3 or 4 years old at that point.
Yep. And I don't know if you were there. I remember him showing me pictures of you, like you were playing hockey or some of the time. I still remember, was it hockey or you're playing something?
No, I would have been, I was playing football back then. My second youngest plays hockey. There's only one of us in the hockey.
Yeah, he was showing me pictures of you guys, but I remember that's when I first heard of you. And then, but I remember going out to the Chicago office, and at the time we were the fastest growing LTL brokerage in the country, and your dad was the biggest, fastest growing Truckload. And I called your dad and I said, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could work together somehow? Like, we're doing this. And he said, yeah, come out and meet us. And so Jet and myself went out there, and we saw what he had going on. It was right before he moved to his new offices. It was the older offices. It was a big campus, a bunch of floors. And I said, wow, this is really cool, Jeff. But I said, this is what blew me away. I said, what are all these people doing? I said, are they selling shippers? Because remember, I'm from the LTL world where we have the carriers. Once you don't need the carriers. Like you've one guy that has carriers.
You just need to procure the load, and then you put it in the system, and the system does the rest. And the carriers select it, and then they do what they need to do. Right.
And that's what I asked him. I said, I saw hundreds of people. I'm like, Jeff, what are these people doing? And I said, are they calling shippers? He goes, no. And he pointed to like a little room with like 10 people in it, or 5 people in it. Those are my shipper guys. And I said, what are all these other hundreds of people doing? And he's like, they're calling carriers. And that's where I was like, oh my God, this is the craziest. How this industry works is, that's the model. I mean, even today, it still is the model where, the idea of what makes C.H. Robinson and Coyote great is we could talk to we have a huge carrier sales force that knows where the market is. I wouldn't even say it's still happening right now. Maybe not as bad as it was back then, but it's still like that. Coyote and CH and the big guys overall can buy better than any other brokerage because they could call every carrier first and book that freight. And that's what blew my mind. And that's when I said to myself, man, I'm going to really invest myself and time into figuring out Truckload. And that's where my next campaign came in to play.
Are you looking to grow your brokerage? Are you struggling to land new customers in these challenging market conditions? Look within. So many companies that tender you freight throughout the domestic United States also have business coming out of Mexico. A year ago, I understand why you might not have seen that freight as an opportunity. But today, Cargado exists. And that means any load coming into or out of Mexico is now an opportunity for you to support. In just over a year, I've been able to see Cargado go from ideation to launch to rapid growth. It's amazing to see how many logistics companies have been able to use Cargado to expand into Mexico to grow their business. Cargado is the first platform that connects logistics companies and trucking companies who are moving freight into and out of Mexico. If you move Mexico freight or are planning to, reach out to Cargado today at cargado.com. That's CARGADO.com.
Yeah. So I appreciate how thorough that kind of explanation was of the first decade at Global Tranz. I have a couple questions that I didn't get a chance to ask, but take me back to, you mentioned this book, your favorite book, Think Rich, Grow Rich. What is it about? What did you take away from that book, or what is something that someone who hasn't read it can take away as like a meaningful lesson from it?
Yeah. So Think and Grow Rich, honestly, the only reason I'm talking right now is because of this book. And I remember I was on the ship. I was my last year in the Navy. I was in my trying to read everything I get. And I remember this one guy came to the ship, and he was kind of known as the kind of the ship. He was always in trouble, and he was just a bad, like not a, didn't have a good positive attitude at all. He was always getting beat up, like not beat up physically, just beat up on like mentally by everyone. And I felt bad for him. But then one day he came in and he was acting all very like totally different. And he's like, I'm going to be a billionaire. I'm going to change the world. And I'm like, how? Everybody's asking, I'm like, oh yeah, you're not, how are you going to do this? And then we finally got it out. He read this book, Think and Grow Rich. And I was like, okay, whatever. And I just brushed that aside. I didn't think about it. But then I was doing all these, when I was going through reading, I was like, man, I remember how changed that guy became because of that one book. So I read it myself. And then all of a sudden I felt the same way. After reading, I was like, I was still in the Navy. I was like, man, I'm going to be a millionaire. I'm going to have a, do whatever I want. I can make anything I want happen. I realized how to do it. And the title of the book is so stupid. It's like the worst title ever, Think and Grow Rich. But actually that's what it is. But it was written 100 years ago it's timeless. And it was actually rehashed as The Secret. You heard of The Secret, the book, The Secret?
Yeah. I didn't know those were, I have it sitting within 10 feet of me. I just don't know where it is, but yes.
Yeah, The Secret is really just an updated version because this was written back in the 1920s. It was definitely written for a man to read. There's a whole chapter on how to use your sexual self for your self-improvement instead of using it, redirecting that. And so there's an updated version called The Secret, but it's really a manifestation. Like you could think Grow Rich is whatever the mind, his best quote from Napoleon Hill, who's the author, is whatever the mind can conceive and whatever he believes he can achieve, and whatever you can conceive and believe you can achieve. And that book was sanctioned by Andrew Carnegie 100 years ago. He hired this guy Napoleon Hill to write down why him and all his friends, J.P. Morgan and all his buddies at the time, Rockefeller, he was number 2, Rockefeller was number 1, how they're so successful. And he didn't say, I don't want you to say how we did it. I want you to write down the blueprint of how we think and what got us everyone here to where they're at. And he did this for like 15, 20 years, wrote this book. And it's the time, like, honestly, it's the number one I think it's the best self-help book of all time. I think if you read this, it's all you need, but you have to take it to heart. And I took it to heart. I really did. I also made everyone that worked for me. And if everybody asks, like, why is so many people successful from Global Tranz? Ask them all. I made them read this book. I think that has a lot to do with it. Also, that's the thing. I think a lot of why people are successful in Global Tranz, they saw me do it, and they're like, "Oh, Andrew's not any smarter than me, so I could do this," which has a lot to do with it too. But Think and Grow Rich is like I said, it's time. Like I think it's like I cannot wait to share that with my children one day and say, "Hey, listen, this is just as good as if you could just build your blueprint of how you think, like just make this the mind frame, the framework. You can't go wrong with this. I mean, this is to see everybody that's successful use this, and it's very simple stuff. Like if you read it, but it's very powerful.
I will. Peter Rentschler of Metaphora actually gave me this book like 3 weeks ago. I just don't know where it is. It's somewhere in the general vicinity, but now I'm taking it as a challenge for you to read it.
So Metaphora came from Jet, who I made read the book. So the power of the book is a lot of people, they won't tell you like it's because of this book, but I think a lot of it has to do. I wouldn't be sitting here talking if it wasn't for this, because that's what changed me, the paradigm of how I think. Like I always thought you have to have money to make money, or you have to come from money, or you have to be given something or get lucky, or work your ass off at a job and then work your way up, which everybody's taught as a kid. But this showed me it's not how it's done.
Yeah. I mean, I do think it's fascinating how you kind of maneuvered. I don't know if maneuver is the right word, or things just kind of fell into place where you realize, like, wait a second, I don't really need cash. Like these eBay guys are going to prepay me. Central Transport is their billing department doesn't know its head from its butt.
Yeah.
Therefore, they won't even invoice me for 2 months. That's 2 months of revenue that's just going to be sitting in a bank account. How do I use it and grow it? I think that's really interesting.
But I urge everybody that I know to, if you want to be an entrepreneur or anything, just be successful in life. Everybody who works for me read this book, because that's how powerful it is. I think it's just as good as a college degree. Honestly, I mean, not putting those down, but I think it's just that amazing. It's changed my life and changed so many people I've seen lives.
Did you ever get a college degree, or you did Navy and then next thing you know, you were founder of Global Trans? GlobalTrans takes off, and here we are.
No, I didn't. But I truly believe you have to be educated. I self-educated. I read everything I could possibly get my hands on. Every big, great business book I read. I just find myself as an AD, I can't pay attention in class, but I could do it by myself. I could pay attention by myself and listen to things in my own time.
Well, so I think if your ADD brain works at all like mine, it's if you find interest in what you're reading, you can read it all day.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
If not, you could read it and 4 seconds later have no idea what you just read and have to go back 3 more times trying to retain it. I'm the same way.
And and if someone's teaching me something, it's much better. I sometimes have to, for some things to sink in, it takes me a little longer, it feels like. So that works way better for me than learning from somebody. Like I've never had a mentor or anybody in my life, just because that's who I'm much better. I'm an introvert and I do things better by myself. But reading is key to that.
So back to Global Trans, one of the things you kind of alluded to it in terms of choosing the agent model, because that was kind of what was available. But I am curious, definitively, if you could do it again, would you still do the agent model? And I'm also curious if you could talk a little bit about the nuance, like what does it take to build a really strong agent model from your side of it in terms of like being the infrastructure, because there are a lot of companies trying to do that today, and it's just not all are as successful as Global Trans was.
Yeah, I think the agent model is great. Obviously, you have to treat the agents as your customer. The shipper's not your customer. That's what we did well at Global Tranz. We didn't really care. Like if the shippers came in, we'd obviously be nice to them, but they weren't our customer. The customer was the agent. The benefits of agent models is the agents will fight for business more than anyone. They're usually better friends with the customers than any other model. Because obviously their livelihood depends on it. They're not going to lose that customer if they switch jobs. In a sense, they get to keep the customer, because the customer is typically not using the agent company; they're using the agent. So the agent switches. Usually, the agent can take the business. And then, so we treated the agents like customers. And the only drawbacks to the agent model is you're not going to get massive customers out of it. It doesn't work well for Fortune 500s. Maybe pieces of the business, but nothing more than that. And then, obviously, they brings a lot of headache with it too, like because everybody does business differently, and so you have to have a huge team managing that. And the biggest problem with LTL agents and the biggest problem in the industry for LTL is for being a broker is, you don't have a huge carrier sales team, but you have this massive team that does rebuilds. Half the shipments are reclassed or reweighed, and every shipper wants to, complain about it and not pay on that. And then the carriers, and it's like, you have so much, probably 20% of it's kind of crazy, but 10% of your revenue is sitting in 90 days plus that you owe the carriers in that model, because there's just that much disputes. And it's like, I always looked at it, I was like, oh man, is that what's going to happen? Sometimes it goes away and you're like, whoa, it's went away. How'd that go away? And sometimes it's like, no, you got to pay or we're shutting you off. But that's why I was happy to get into Truckload after Global Tranz, because that's the worst part about it. And the opposite flip side of Truckload, it's the other side. You have to have carrier hundreds of people find sourcing. It's all sourcing. Not very little happens after the fact, like an LPO.
Why don't the Fortune 500s end up using agents much? Because it's interesting because I lived primarily in the truckload Fortune 500 world. So agents are about as far from familiar to me as they can be, which so I'm just curious about this.
Yeah. So agents, remember when you use a CH or Coyote for a big Fortune 500, you're gonna have this farm of teams. You win a lane and you have all these carrier sales reps going to work for you. The agent model usually is they're the carrier sales rep, or they have a couple people. They might one or two people working for them. So they're great for one load. If a shipper's getting one load a day and they have to find a truck, but if it's like 10 loads a day and they have to source trucks, that's hard for them to do that.
Yeah.
They'd have to. But some of the agent models like Global Tranz, we had a system where you could feed it to the brokerage there and they could manage it for you. But then the agents, they don't want to share the split. It's just it's almost like it just never comes because of that. There's just too much. They do get them, but it's not as good as big as the Coyotes and CHs of the world.
But why would any shipper necessarily pick an agent over? Like if I'm looking at adding one provider to my network and I've got these 4 brokers soliciting me and then I've got 4 agents, like why would I end up picking, even as a smaller non-Fortune 500, why am I picking the agent over a broker if it kind of feels like I'm then almost double brokering it because they might give it to a broker? No?
Well, typically they give it to their brokerage. So if it's like an Armstrong agent or a Global Tranz agent, they have this internal carrier sales team that they would, so it's still internal. It's just not but typically the agent models, they are brokering the loads. Their team, they might have 2 people in their office that are doing that. But if they get a big account, they have to send it over to the corporate to do. And that's where, but they don't have control over it either. And then it's just, it's just, you have to manage it. Well, some do, but that's why it's not prevalent as big as, and then also agents really rely on the wine and dine. They're the best at it. They're best at, creating most of our big shippers at Global Tranz were the best friends of the agent. Obviously that's how it works. And, agents are the best at getting the business. I would say buying the business, maybe I wouldn't say they do it illegally, but they are the best at wining, dining, and taking out people. And also, if it's a good agent, they're going to be picking up the phone on the weekends. And that's where I think TQL has done so good, is because their model really is a bunch of agents sitting on phones because they get paid pretty much like an agent. They're commission, so they're very. If you ask any shipper, who's your most responsive brokers? Typically, the ones that have a lot of skin in the game with the commission, which are, TQL reps are great at that. And also, the agent model, they'll pick up the phone, they'll handle things. Maybe if it's a good agent, you might get a bad agent. You're not, half of them are good, half of them are bad. But most of them, if you get a good agent, it could be better than going through a CH.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, you still have commission in the split model, like Coyote, Molo, CH, Arxo, all those folks have commission. It's just as the selling rep, the customer selling rep, you're getting probably half of what you could get as the agent. But then again, you're also doing half the work. Right. The agent's having to cover the load sometimes, whereas as the sales rep, you're not necessarily doing that in a split model business. But I get what you're saying. So I
do miss having the agent sales force. It's the greatest way, this business model, you need distribution is key in this industry. You have to have a distribution, whether it's lots of people on the phone or agent model. And I do miss having that. It was just because it just always, if you get a good agent, you just know they're going to grow every year, and they just do it themselves. And they very rarely lose business because it's like their livelihood. They'll fight tooth and nail for that business.
It feels like it's a lot cleaner of a business to manage financially, in terms of just attributing cost. And we struggled with that, I think, in the more traditional split model brokerage, where it's what's the cost of this operator that's doing 3 tasks on a load? How much should they be attributed to the total cost to move the load? There was a little more nuance to a split model where you're splitting up by task versus, I think, if you just have an agent whose job it is to procure the freight and you handle the billing and some of the other infrastructure.
Yeah, the agent, they since they do everything, it's cradle to grave, and they like I said, half of them do good, half of them do bad. For a company, the worst part though is agent models aren't really the most profitable business if you're actually going to start an agent model, because remember, the going rate is like 30% to the agent or to the company. But think about this: if the agent, if that, and this happens all the time, the rep they'll move a $5,000 load and make $200 on it because they don't care, right? And then is the company really making money if it's you're putting $5,000 getting paid 45, 50 days, maybe, and then making $40 on it, $50, you're probably just breaking even. So you have a lot of that. You have to. So there's a lot of nuances that you have to fight all the time as an agent model. And then the agents were like, well, I'll just go somewhere else, and they go somewhere else, and they switch all the time. If you think about it, what would you say? I would say 20-30% of the business is agent model of the truckload brokers, maybe 25.
I don't know if I could even put a number. I would guess less because I just don't know of many companies that are sizable on the agent side. There's a couple, but like if you look at the top 50 brokerages in transport topics, I would guess 45 are not agent.
Yeah. It's just it's hard to scale in that model as a broker, as in truckload. It was great for LTL, but for truckload, it's just harder to. Very rare do you have an agent that you could manage a massive account. It does happen, but it's that goes way more to the carrier sales models with the massive floors of people.
Yeah. So let's back to kind of just the general GlobalTrans story. How long were you involved in the business, and when you did finally decide to sell, take me through that process and kind of why you did when you did.
Yeah, so about 2014 comes around. We've been in business for 10 years. We're about $500,000, but that's obviously actually the last 3 years of that. Ever since I met your dad, I was really interested in how do you doing truckload, but how do you what's the next in 20 years? What does truckload look like from the shipper standpoint? And that's where I realized when I was at Global Tranz, I was like, okay, I asked the guys, I said, okay, we're getting AB InBev truckload. How do we get this? Because we started a brokerage internally, carrier sales model, coyote model, just like what you guys built there. And then, but I remember, how do we get the freight? And they showed me the spreadsheet the shipper sent to us. It was an RFP. It was a Excel spreadsheet from AB InBev, and they sent us they said, I put our rates here and I email it back to them. And that's where, honestly, that's where the idea for 10-4 came. So my first company was 10-4 after Global Tranz. 10-4 was supposed to be, what is emerged right now is 10-4. But then, so in 2014, I started 10-4.com. And then quickly, we started showing the shippers what we built at 10-4, which is essentially a marketplace. Didn't have an RFP platform in it yet, but it was a marketplace, and it would show you where all your trucks are at. And then, you could bring all your brokers and carriers in, and they could trade. I was trying to essentially create a load board for the shipper. Like, here's a load board that does your procurement. You could bring all your brokers and carrier instead of sending this email spreadsheet. Why not have that digitized, especially, and your spot? But all we had was a spot at the time. We didn't have the contract side. And then when I showed it to AB InBev, they literally said, we don't care about the market. We don't care about the marketplace you built. We like they saw the trucks on the map, and they're like, "Oh, that's cool. We want that." So all of a sudden, I fought it tooth and nail, but I should have actually went this way. I was actually wrong. Travis Ryan was running at the time, 10-4, and he was my CTO at Global Tranz, and he was running 10-4. We did it out of Boulder, Colorado, and obviously every shipper we went to wanted the map of seeing their trucks on, because there wasn't 4 kites or P44 yet. It was just you wouldn't see your trucks. And it was, we had it where you like just Uber, you could see all your trucks moving around, and we tie into the LDs and all that. So we had Warner, for AB InBev, we had we tied up Warner for them. But the idea was to create create an RFP marketplace. And we pivoted right then to a visibility provider.
I was going to say, I never knew 10-4 as a marketplace organization.
No, yeah,
so
it was.
I'm surprised hearing this. I thought it was visibility.
It was 100%. Yeah, we had to switch because that's all the shippers wanted. So we got AB InBev. We got about 5 major shippers, and it was just us and 4 kites going at it. And then my heart was never in. I always wanted to help be a part of the solution of what I saw at Coyote, which is you need hundreds of sales reps to call carriers every day to find out where they're at. I was like, there's got to be a better way to bring the carriers and to make this visibility. I was always interested in the matching, not the tracking. And if I could go back to that time, I should have been more interested in the tracking because see what the valuations that P44 and all these other guys got. Because we were really the first. It was us and Four Kites at the same time going at it, and I thought we had a better product than them. They had better. They had a better connect. They were better at connecting with EDIs and all that and APIs. We weren't that great at that, which we should have been great. That was the key. Is you have to the whole idea behind P44 and Four Kites is let's tie everybody in with APIs or EDI, and then you only have to tie into us to tie into all these carriers, and everybody brings their carriers on. It's easy. It's network effect. So I left. So at that time, I was not really into the tracking of it, and that's where we got an offer from Trimble to buy it. That it was like too hard to refuse. It was like, so we got that. I took the money, and then we split it. I took that and started a merge. That's really how that happened. I took all the money from that, which wasn't that much. It was really enough to just pay what we put into it and a little more to. And I took that money, and it was 2017 when they Trimble bought 10-4, and unfortunately, it didn't go anywhere because like if you still go to AB and Bev, it was kind of surprising when I went there. It's like they still have 10-4 on the wall, like their trucks moving around, but because we gave it away for free for the first 6 months, and then they never end up charging for it. But a big company should never buy. You never should buy a startup, right? I mean, if
Interesting.
because right when they bought it, right, the first thing they did was bring their HR team into it, and that just screwed up everything, right? You bring their HR in, it's like you're a startup, you can't act like a big company. And so they bought it, and it just went nowhere. It was actually a big failure, and it's unfortunate. I hate to see that, but back then I didn't really realize that either. I didn't realize like they would just treat it not like a startup. They treated it like when they bought. So Trimble bought like a company. What was the company they bought? Where it shows the miles, PC mileage.
I didn't know Trimble owned PC Miler.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they still do. I might be wrong on that, but what they bought something. It was either that one or something else, but it was already it worked out because it was already an established product. It had customers. It had, revenue. You don't have to, it doesn't, you could bring in a for hire guy. You could bring in a good CEO to run it. Startups, you can't do that. You can't just bring in anybody the founder has to be there. There has to be, and you can't have a big company overseeing it with HR. That's for sure. So that really went nowhere. And I remember when P44, that's when P44 said, let's get in a truckload right then because they saw we were doing it. And, I wouldn't say they took the idea, but they're the ones that really took the bull by the horns and ran with it. And, in hindsight, we should have stuck with but I came from this whole match. I'm a third party guy. I've always been that my whole career. It's matching. How do you match trucks and shippers? So that's why I left and started a merge right then. I took all the technology we built at 10-4, that marketplace stuff, ripped it out, gave them visibility to Trimble, and then started a merge in 2017.
Attention freight brokers and 3PLs, Greenscreens.ai is transforming how freight professionals price and quote freight. With AI-powered pricing and real-time market intelligence, Greenscreens delivers accurate, reliable predictions to help stay competitive in a constantly shifting market. Whether managing spot rates or long-term contracts, Greenscreens empowers brokers to quote with confidence and boost profitability, removing the guesswork from freight pricing strategies. Trusted by over 220 brokerages, Greenscreens is leading the way in the future of freight pricing. And now there's Illuminate, Greenscreens' latest product designed to shine a light on deeper freight market insights. Illuminate provides unparalleled visibility into spot and contract freight trends, giving users a clearer view of pricing fluctuations and market conditions to inform smarter, more profitable decisions. Visit greenscreens.ai/thefreightpod and discover how Greenscreens and Illuminate can help win more business more profitably.
Okay. And so what was the original idea for what Emerge was going to be?
I said to myself, this is all I said. I said, every shipper in the United States, 90% of the freight is contract, and all that is run on a bid. Like most of it's run on a bid. And it's either a 3, 6, or 12-month bid cycle. And here's that. It just came from this. It was like, if everybody was using the same bidding platform, it would make it's so much better for the carriers that were within it, because the carriers then, like, let's say $1 billion shipper pushes a truck 10 times a day here, and this, they're pushing all this capacity out, awarding to these carriers, so the system then gets smarter. And then the next shipper comes in, runs a bid, and now we know which carriers to bring into those lanes. Now, it's kind of funny. Our business model during COVID was amazing. Like, for shippers, they would love it. Like, well, we need more capacity. Right now, our business model is really, we're not a SaaS-based product. We do have SaaS. You could pay us a SaaS, but it's really, we make money on the matching. We make money on matching new capacity to shippers by using data. So the idea behind Emerge is, like, if you can just get enough shippers using this platform, you can open up a door. Because if you had a carrier with, like, say 50 trucks, and I said, here's a shipper, any shipper in the United States, and I said, what's the chances that you are part of their bid? It's like maybe 2% that you're invited to that bid, like, even with 50 trucks. And maybe one of your trucks would be perfect for one of their lanes. So that was the whole idea behind Emerge, is like, if you could get all the shippers on a platform, that's what we gave away for free, and then open a door for carriers of size, 20 trucks or more, that could buy a contract. It would be the first contract marketplace that carriers would have, because they really don't have a place right now they could go and say, they have to be a part of the shippers network, obviously, to get that, or buy it from a brokerage. So the idea behind Emerge has always been, give the shippers a free platform for their 3, 6 month, 12-month bids. Make it simple, super simple, because that was a big problem during COVID, is using our competitors, which are Coupa and Jagger, were very hard to do. You would run those on an annual bid. That's what most shippers do. But for mini bids, and if your rings break down, it's terrible. You have to do everything by email. We made that simple. Unfortunately, it hasn't been a problem since COVID. If I told a shipper, why are you better? I'd say we're faster and easier. They wouldn't really care, because they only do once a bid. They don't use that software that much right now. But as we know, like, everything cycles. Like, it's going to be a tight market again. So hopefully shippers would want to get ahead of it. But we give away a free platform to the shipper. Carriers and brokers are invited, and their brokers. We also give them a spot market, and that's one of our best systems. And we also tell shippers when they shouldn't go to spot, because most shippers, I would say 30% of shippers' freight should be in the spot market anyway, at all times. Most of the time, let's say 90% of the time, should be in the spot market, not as a contract. And these are the lanes that, because
why do you go ahead? I was just going to ask why.
Okay, low volume contract lanes. So, like, we call them low volume. So let's say you have a bid and you're looking for 3 trucks per 1 truck a week in one lane. And you have that in your contract. You're doing you want an annual contract on 1 truck at this one location per week. Right now, actually, the spot market's way cheaper. Is, first of all, cheaper than contract. Second, usually it's a broker who buys that. It's not a carrier that buys that. It's usually a broker that does buy that. So with Emerge, it's like, why not allow not just that one broker to have access to it, but all your brokers to have access to it? And then you'll get a true market price. Because remember, if you do a year contract with anyone, they're going to have to put some fluff in it to make sure that they can service this for a whole year at this price. So you have that. And then you have, if it's a live, it has to get, obviously not a drop trailer or something like that. If it's a live, mm-hmm. You should allow all your brokers and all your capacity providers, all your carriers, all your brokers, access to that load when it comes available. So that's what we try to push shippers. And 30% of that. So if that was the case, it wouldn't be 90-10, 90% contract, 10% spot in our industry. It would be more like 60-40 right now. But that 40%, 30-40% would be so much better being in the spot market as far as a costing standpoint. Now, obviously, you're only going to let the carriers and brokers you want to work with anyway, like, do it. So our system allows you to say, hey, allow TQL arrive and so-and-so, and these carriers to book it. But then it goes into our marketplace. It starts low. So you said it's, let's say 10% below DAT, 15%, and it moves up over time. And that's one good thing that Convoy brought. I got that idea from Convoy, actually. That was a great idea.
People can buy it then. So, like, if I start the lane Chicago to Dallas at 10% under DAT and it's at $1.90, let's call it, it shows up. So it's a spot load. I'm Anheuser-Busch. That's my spot load. And it's coming onto the Emerge platform, and my approved brokers and carriers can then essentially buy it now.
Yes. Yeah. So you would so instead of saying what we're trying to tell shippers, instead of awarding this to one broker at a fixed price throughout the whole year, push this in the spot market and watch what happens. First of all, you're going to get better price. You're going to save 5 to 10% on that. And then allow the carriers that you want to book it, allow access to it. And so so you would allow, like you said, you could pick which carriers are allowed to buy it.
And theoretically, that's best in this market, right? A down market where, people keep bidding lower and lower and the rates just keep dropping. And so, spot is well below where the contracts are. But if it's 2021 again, or we get another, it doesn't have to be another COVID, but the next up market, I imagine it won't be the same. Like that 60-40 you'll want it to lean a little heavier, 80-90% contract with lower spot, because the spot's going to outweigh the contract rates, right? It's just the other side of the market.
Yeah, I would say that it's, a lot of carriers did hold their rates for the shippers, but usually it was asset-based carriers, not the brokers. The brokers they obviously can't hold a rate like a carrier could. And it's typically not on these lanes. These lanes are like I said, these are mainly won from the brokers. Like the brokers just win these one, and it's makes your annual bid way bigger, right? If you have all these lanes, so you should be in the spot market anyway. But yeah, it could go up. But let's say rates do go up, and you're seeing the spot market crazy. Why not just run a contract then? You could run a contract at that point, and then. But right now, you're going to save 10 to 15% by doing that. And I'm doing typically, that's on the low. Like usually, could be even better, because remember, you're allowing every one of your carriers and brokers access to this freight now at that current day's price, which is typically, as you know, for the last 3 years, been bad, or been on the shipper side, it's been really low rates. But if, like I said, things do change, those lanes would have broken anyway. Those brokers would not have committed to it if it's one load a week at that price. So it makes no sense to think, I'm going to save myself. Some brokers, if no one's going to lose, like let's say rates go up 30%, the brokers are not going to be able to hold the rates anyway. So I think it makes sense to do that, but also be nimble. You have to say to yourself, I will be willing to run a bid if I do start seeing rates go higher, but that's not been the case for 3 years.
Yeah. So how does it work then in terms of driving revenue? If the tool is free for the shipper, when do they start, or who pays the bills? Like, are carriers and brokers paying to be on the platform, or the shipper pays when a load transacts? How does that work?
Yeah. So how it works with Emerge is, let's say a carrier, remember, we open a door for carriers. Our system's free for the shipper, and then we open a door for carriers, not brokers, but carriers to come in and buy the lane from the platform. And then we're transparent with the carrier. So you see the carrier name, it's like ABC Trucking. Here's how many trucks they have. And then obviously we're just doing the billing at that point. So we didn't have to source. We're not sourcing the carrier. We do have a sourcing team. If that carrier does fall off and buys a contract, we have to find a new truck. So we have to act like a brokerage in that aspect. But, we'll never win all the shippers' freight. I think, 5 to 10%, but that will help pay for, that's how we're supplementing this, giving you a free platform. And yes, it has hurt us with some shippers because they're like, well, I can't give you, but remember, it's not Emerge pricing it. It's the carriers coming in and buying it. It's actual person at the carrier buying it.
But and then you have like a transaction fee, like a brokerage fee, but on top of whatever they're paying. Interesting.
Yeah, transparent fee that's like 7.9.
That's so interesting.
And then we make, like I said, that's how we pay for the platform. So the idea behind Emerge is like, hey, you get a free platform, and we only make money as if we save you money, because usually you're not going to give it to a new carrier unless you're getting some kind of savings somewhere. But also creates a great bidding environment. I think shippers that don't use the platform, that don't do bids a lot, that don't run a 3-month, I think it's way better to do a 3-month bid versus 12-month bid. You're going to get way better rates from your carriers. You have to be quicker though. You have to be able to do that. A lot of shippers don't like to do that. They like to want, the worst thing that shipper, and you've heard this before, shippers always say, I want to whittle down my carrier base. I want to work with as least amount of carriers as I possibly can. And I think that's, The best buyer of freight is not the one that does that. The best buyer of freight by 10% over everybody else just allows everybody in. Doesn't matter who you are. So they play the broker. They do a great job of there's always a broker there's always someone willing to buy into a lane. So I think if you're looking to cut your transportation costs by 5 to 10%, be open to more carriers and brokers. Think about this, especially a spot market. Let's say let's say the biggest brokerage is at $2,000 in this lane. There could be some guy like an agent model that's at $1,500, $1,200, like a $400 or $500 savings on one load, just because they know that truck is delivering tomorrow there, and he wants to go back here, and the big guy didn't know about it. So you want to have enough. You don't need to have every broker in there, but you want to have enough to where it's not overwhelming. Like it's not, there's a right mix.
Go ahead.
How do you feel about this?
Well, this is such a fun thing to think about because there's a rebuttal to all this, right? So like your example's right that on a given lane that CH buys at 2,000, there is someone out there who knows about a truck that can do it for 1,400, right? But by and large, if you compare CH's buying power to the market, CH is beating any individual across the board, right? Whether it's a person or another company.
So I'm not saying you should let them in. Let them in. You still let them in, and they're still going to win their percentage of business. But I'm saying just be open to working with more. I'm not saying work with everybody, but work with the right ones.
Yeah, but there's so much. There's such a crap. It's so interesting how shippers can choose to manage their freight because you made an interesting point around buying business. I think most brokers at some point have had to, or I shouldn't say have felt like their only path to eventually having a profitable relationship with a shipper is to buy freight from the jump because they realize, hey, this shipper is letting me in, but only if my rates are good enough to beat the incumbents, which on average, a broker on a bid any random broker doesn't have better buying power than the incumbents. They're just committing to taking the freight at lower rates than the incumbents because it's the only way they can get the loads.
Yes.
And their hope or their bet is that over time, they will quote unquote prove themselves. And that means servicing the committed volume they have really well. And that hoping that then leads to getting more business. And once you're an incumbent, you feel like I don't have to price as aggressively.
Of course.
But if you look at any given bid at any given time, it's very likely a shipper has let in a broker who is thinking about how they have to buy business. So it could be a strategy for a shipper every year to let 5 or 10 new brokers into their bid who they know will buy 3 to 5% of the bid each if allowed to. And then you've got 10 brokers buying 50% of your bid at the lowest rates, all planning for the future. And then the next year you could theoretically just do the same thing and get rid of the 10 who supported you last year.
You're always paid 10%. It only works for products that like it doesn't matter. Like you don't have to worry about thefts or you have to worry about it works for like commodities, big commodities, but they typically pay. I mean, we have $12 billion running through our platform now. They are the best guys who do that, who let that in and have that model. And there's a few of them. They pay 10%, take their whole. I mean, that's a huge. When you think about it, if you're $1 billion shipper, it's $100 million a year. Unfortunately, most shippers don't even think that way. Like if I said let's do this, they're okay. Like we're happy with our service. I'm saying
I don't think it's a.
If you want to save money, you should.
Yeah, if you want to save money today, but I don't think it's a good strategy. If good is not a fair term. If your goal is purely to save money and you don't care long term about the relationships you have with the brokers, then yes, every year you can burn through a batch of brokers. And in this highly competitive, oversaturated industry, there will always be a fresh crop of brokers for you to burn, maybe till the end of time.
Right.
But it's not it's not a good strategy if you're trying to develop long-term partnerships, because eventually, these brokers will expect to get good business from you at rates they can make money on. They won't just eat crow year after year. In fact, there's also the argument to be made that a lot of these brokers, if they don't feel like they're getting their money's worth within months, will stop supporting the freight. I mean, like we
Right.
always used to try to be very, very strategic about freight that we bought. And what I mean by that is, like, I was looking for the low volume lanes. I wanted to be the lowest rate on the random lane from Manitoba to Phoenix that shipped 18 times a year or 1.5 times a month. I was happy to be $1 a mile less than the next guy because I could do the math. And over the course of a year, it's 18 loads. I'm going to lose $500 each. That's $9,000.
Mm-hmm.
If I can't find a way to make $9,000 back on this good opportunity, then I'm just not a good broker. So like
Right.
there's such nuance to navigating that strategy effectively. But
And also,
it's
I believe also niches. Like, think about this: every broker can say we're the best in this one market. A lot of them, because I mean, over any pick 20 brokers, every one of them will have like their way, where they're good. It's just the way the work. It's crazy how it works like that, but that's the way the industry is still. One broke, and it's big. It's big. Where, like I said, the biggest guy could be at 2,000, the next guy could be at 1,400. It looks like that. And I'm talking about like 5 trucks a day difference. I mean, and you're like, how does the biggest guy not know with these carrier base? And it's still like that. Now, I'm not saying let every broker in, but you should have a fair mix because of that. And there's always someone. And if you do care about cutting costs, I mean, it does make sense to have a bigger. But you're right; it doesn't for long term strategy. I would have the right mix. I think the right way is to do kind of a little hybrid of that, not to have
yeah.
not the extreme of let anyone in. But yeah, that's the best shippers, the ones that pay the least by 10% over the next guy is those guys, the ones that do that. They're very open to carriers. They're not trying to whittle down their carriers. The
Yeah.
worst, the highest paying ones are the ones always saying we want less carriers to work with. There's a huge cost with that.
Yeah. And
Attention freight brokers and 3PLs, Greenscreens.ai is transforming how freight professionals price and quote freight. With AI-powered pricing and real-time market intelligence, Greenscreens delivers accurate, reliable predictions to help stay competitive in a constantly shifting market. Whether managing spot rates or long-term contracts, Greenscreens empowers brokers to quote with confidence and boost profitability, removing the guesswork from freight pricing strategies. Trusted by over 220 brokerages, Greenscreens is leading the way in the future of freight pricing. And now there's Illuminate, Greenscreens' latest product designed to shine a light on deeper freight market insights. Illuminate provides unparalleled visibility into spot and contract freight trends, giving users a clearer view of pricing fluctuations and market conditions to inform smarter, more profitable decisions. Visit greenscreens.ai/thefreightpod and discover how Greenscreens and Illuminate can help win more business more profitably.
I think they're generally accepting that reality that they're getting their money's worth, or they feel like they're getting their money's worth in support, in commitment to the business, because it's a lot harder to expect someone who was awarded 10 loads a year to be committed to those 10 loads than it is to expect someone who was awarded 20,000 loads a year to actually execute the 20,000.
Right.
But at the end of the day,
down to it. Think about this: the CFO and the CEO of most companies, for big guys, they're going to listen to their head of transportation. Thing. He's going to say, "We have $1 billion need for trucking this year," and they're going to say, "Okay, yeah. Is there any way we can save money on that? No, we've done everything we could." But I mean, if they knew like this this person only working with 10 carriers, like you and I know that there's probably a 15 to 20% savings if they were just more open. But that guy doesn't have the incentive to do that because he's already hey, I got my $1 billion, and they're happy with it. By the way, I'm showing we're paying average to DAT and on Freightways. We're showing that we're paying pretty good. So why do we have to mess with anything up and add more people on my team? And I have to actually justify like, why do I need double the team, or triple the team? It's a fight that a lot of guys just don't want to, a lot of men and women transportation people don't want to do. But there's a huge cost savings in freight that most big guys, most of the CFOs and CEOs don't even know about. And it's significant. I mean, you're talking about 10% or 20% on $1 billion freight spend, and it's there. But most shippers do it good. Most shippers are good, and they don't just run a spreadsheet, just Excel spreadsheet, at least. They're using Coupa Jagger.
I'm curious what the reception from shippers was like as you got this business up and running, because it's different than, I don't know of any direct competitors you have that offer all of the services you provide, is the right way to put it. I think you have direct competitors in facets of your business. There are, as you said, Coupa and Jagger are two direct competitors on the RFP side, but they don't offer the kind of execution platform that you're talking about. Similarly, and name a broker, Molo, CH, Arrive, they're competitors with you on the execution side, but they don't offer an RFP tool. So I am curious, as you brought this to market, what was the shipper reception like? Because I feel like oftentimes shippers are hesitant of anyone, if it kind of looks like a broker, smells like a broker, it's probably a broker. Right. And if they feel like they're being deceived, then they don't want to deal with it. In this case, it seems like you're open about it, but I'm just curious what that reception was like, and if you've had to do a lot of kind of educating to get people on board with what you're doing.
Yeah, so good question, because I think that, it's always been hard, because they're very confusing when we say it's not a SaaS product. And I'm glad we didn't go SaaS actually at this point, because SaaS is very hard to get people to pay right now, because everybody's like, should we have, they're SaaSed out in a sense, I think. We actually see it because we actually have a SaaS model. We do give the option, hey, you don't need to use our market if you just pay us a SaaS. And most people choose the market because it's that's the way to go. But I think the closest competitor we have, obviously Coupa and Jagger's who we go against for the RFP platform, but the biggest, I would say the closest one we have is what Transplace was. The Transplace without the managed trans aspect. So Transplace, we're pretty much what they were without the managed trans. We run your bid, that's what they do at Transplace. They run the execution layer. They have they charge a $15, $20 managed 3PL prices for managing the freight and doing the tendering and all that. But they also manage the RFP, and they also have brokers that comes and buys it from that RFP. So you think about it, that's really what we do. We just automated. We don't have, if you use what is Uber now, Transplace, if you use them, you're going to see Uber coming as a broker versus in us, it's going to say the carrier name but it's just a change of term. I mean, in a sense, we're the same company I would say that's the closest competitor we would have. Who are they like? Oh, they're like Transplace, but without the managed trans aspect. And you could switch at any time. You're not beholden to it. When you use Transplace, it's very hard to switch. You're pretty much writing your whole transportation department over them. With us, you get to keep your transportation department, but have all the benefits of that, of having the procurement and all that done, because that's what Transplace does. They do procurement and the execution. We just don't do the execution.
Yes, it's interesting. Those businesses are can be messy, because I feel like sometimes shippers don't want, or they want the kind of wall between the technology organization supporting them and the brokers executing for them.
Right.
And so I actually remember a very distinct issue where Transplace was being incredibly shady. This was well after Sanderson was gone, so this wasn't on him, but it was before Uber bought them, so I can't even blame them. But we had an instance where we had a new shipper wanting a new Transplace shipper wanting to add us as a broker. And when they reached out to their Transplace team and said, hey, you should add Molo as a broker for us, we want them on our next bid, Transplace said, no, you shouldn't use them. Look at their on-time look at their acceptance percentage for one of our other shippers. They're at 40%. They're terrible.
Yeah.
And what they had done was, this was for, I think it was Nestle Waters, one of the water companies. It wasn't Niagara, but it was a company who had primary acceptance and backup acceptance as two completely separate metrics. And you could have whatever rates you wanted on file for backup, and there were no acceptance parameters. You just take what loads made sense for you. On your primary, you had to accept 95 or whatever percent. So we accepted 95% on primary, and on backup we were like 40 something percent. And they only took the piece of information about backup and said, this is their acceptance percentage for our other customer. You shouldn't work with them. So they essentially manipulated data to make us look worse, which is a big, like, it's just an example, but it's representative of kind of the mistrust that can exist when you have these companies that are doing multiple things, and there's a conflict. They are incentivized to keep any broker off of that bid because it's more of the pie that they get to keep. So I'm curious, as you hear a story like that, like, how do you think about that? Have you had shippers like have concerns about conflict there?
Most shippers are not happy with them. I would say that, and then I would say that the difference between us and Transplace is we don't have that control. We don't tell the ship. We don't have that right. We give them a platform. We say, here's the platform, you manage it. Here's your usernames. They let everyone in. The only caveat is, unless you want to pay a SaaS, you have to let our carriers. And that's what we're transparent. It's not like when you use a 3PL, they always had a problem at like these companies, because they always say, like, we can only carve off so much for our brokerage, and then the shippers will get pissed because it's a conflict. But when you're transparent, like our system, you'll see the carrier name, you'll see the price. We don't force you to use them in it, but if you give them freight, then we get paid. But it's your decision. We're not. So that's how we keep the conflict out of it. Yeah, but it's been tough. I would say it's been hard for us. Like a lot of investors are like, wait, why would the brokers want to use you guys if you guys are doing this? I'm like, well, first of all, they do it all day long with 3PLs. So every 3PL is a big brokerage, and they go into those and they get their freight. Actually, 99% of the freight in a merge goes to brokers. I mean, 98%, we win like 2%. So it's like, and I don't ever see it getting past maybe 10% is like maybe our max with a shipper, because they have these rules anyways that they don't want to give all their eggs in one broker. So I've always have, and we allow brokers to come in our system, tie in the rates. So all their spot rates are pushed in our system. So if you have CH Robinson, you see your CH Robinson rates and all that. So we work with, we have to tread the line, but we don't compete in the same way that they do. We don't buy the lane and then source it with carrier sales reps. We're just transparent. We show the carriers that are backing it up, which is not, honestly, it's like, that's why we're not growing. We would be way bigger if we actually did it the other way, just bought freight. But I think that's where you get in a conflict at that point. Like the transparency is where we get away with it. We're like, yeah, we are a broker. We see your data, but here's a carrier name. You could use them or not. And it's actually helping you get better rates and find more capacity. Yeah. They don't care about capacity right now, but they will in a later day.
Hopefully sooner than later.
Yeah.
Has this kind of scratched the itch you had? I mean, because you've sold two businesses now. At least one I know was wildly successful. It's not like you needed to start a merge, No. But you kind of mentioned like feeling this. You always wanted this kind of marketplace. You wanted this kind of carrier sourcing stuff that you saw at places like Coyote. So I'm just curious. Do you feel like this itch has been scratched, and where are you taking this from here?
Oh, for sure. I told my wife and family, I'm not doing any more business. I don't want to do any more startups. I think this is good enough. And it's just gone a lot longer than I wanted. I was hoping to be out of it by now, but obviously the 3 years these last 4 years really just don't count in a sense, like, because it's just, everything's on pause. I look like everything's. So I think that, it's going to take probably 10 to 15 years to sell this, maybe 10. We'll be at 10 years and 27. My goal is to get to break even we'll be there about 12 months, just 18 months. And then look for an option to get out of it, because I do love this, but I found out now I'm almost 47. Like, I definitely don't have the drive that I did when I was 37, when I started it. So I'll be much better as a investor and being on boards and stuff like that, which I'm doing now. I like that much more than being a founder of a startup and having to make the founder, it's enough. Like, as a founder, like, there's a lot of hard decisions I have to make. It's a lot of pain and a lot of very, very rarely you have like the days where you're like, oh my God, this is great. Like, my whole career has always been like the steady rise up. It's never been like boom. And with Emerge, it's been like this, it's still going like this. And then it's like pause for the last 4 years, because everything's like, no one cares about capacity. And No one's running that many bids. Like right now, why would you run a bid? Like it's very hard to get shippers run bids, like when rates are bottomed out. But at least they can't get worse. I mean, trucks just can't move if it gets any worse. We all know that. But I think the last 4 years have changed. If you asked me 4 or 5 years ago, I'd be like, oh, I'm working for 60, 70. But now, like these last 4 years, I don't know, man. Like it's been a tough time for any entrepreneur. And maybe there's a few companies in the news that could say otherwise, but most entrepreneurs it's not been fun the last 4 years.
What kind of advice would you give to people enduring tough times like this, where it feels like the cards are stacked against you? Like, as someone who's been through it now with multiple businesses and are currently going through it, I'm just curious, what advice would you give to fellow entrepreneurs navigating these kind of really unfun times?
Well, I think the best times, like for instance, when 2007-8 happened, I was at Global Tranz, and I didn't even realize at the time because I didn't have any money, but that there was a crisis going on because we're growing. If you're growing in a crisis, it doesn't matter. You could have, it's amazing. And the best times ever to start a business are now. I mean, it's the easiest. What you needed 10 people to build let's say you want to build a product. You need one person, 2 people now, not 10, just to get your MVP out. If you want, and there's always ideas. There's a million ideas. Like there's always, and you could see them in your job. Like anybody could see, like, I wish there was something that did this, or I wish there was something that did that. And then just look at the TAM. I mean, and what's great about our industry, especially freight truck logistics, is I would say in most industries, I wouldn't be able to do what I did. It's just because there's a level of competition in most industries. Freight is not much competition. Like anyone can build a great company. As you know a lot of great CEOs, and most of them, we can only do freight. Like this is a good thing they're freight businesses, because most of us, we couldn't build a tech company. We couldn't build. So I think anyone in this industry has capability of being an entrepreneur. And I've seen it. I mean, I've seen some of my guys where I'm like, how did this guy do it? I mean, I had 2 guys that sold their company for $200 million. If you would ask, I was like, oh my God, these guys were not how did they do this? But it's freight. We're in an industry where I think anyone could be successful. And you know what's even crazier is if you ask any CEO or anybody that's an entrepreneur, let's say you want to hire someone to come run your company. There's such a lack of talent for that. Like there's just no one, I think in this industry, this is the best industry where you could work on yourself, work on your skills, and move up and be the CEO of any company. Because it's very hard to hire high executive talent. It's so hard. Like if you had a portfolio, if you had a company right now and you're going to hire a head of sales, you might have 2 names. You know everybody too. Yeah. Maybe 1 or 2 names, and they're going to be hard to get too. But it's not like there's hundreds of people. Like there's not a huge amount of talent in our industry. I don't know why that is, but
there's got to be something wrong with us that we think that way. Because I agree with you, but I like these 2 things juxtaposed don't make sense, right? The thought that on one hand, anyone could be successful, anyone can be a successful CEO in our space, like they can build a business and make money and make it happen. But on the other hand, if you were to look for a replacement, you wouldn't feel like you could find a good person anywhere. Like those 2 things don't go well next to each other.
Because I think a lot of people don't work on it. Like I wish they would just, like most people just need to, like, what makes the greatest leaders, sales leaders? Like I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I didn't know how to be an entrepreneur. I just said, okay, I'm going to just read every book on, like, I just got to think like they do. I wouldn't say I was a D student at school. I'm not like a high IQ person. I'll admit it, but I think I studied enough and read enough about the subjects that I wanted to be good at, that I became good at it. And like I said earlier, I said, that's why most of my people are successful. That maybe it has nothing to do with the book. I think it's because they saw me do it. They're like, wait, this guy can do it. I can do it. And, but yeah, there is a lack of massive, like there's just, I don't know what it is, but I hope people take this as a call to action. Like you could have any job. If you're not an entrepreneur already, if you don't want to be an entrepreneur and you have your sights in the company, you could take over that company. It's just very few people step up to the plate to do that too. But I think that in the first chapter of my favorite book, Think and Grow Rich, talks about that. The guy works for Edison, and he's like, I'm going to work. He didn't know anything about he just wanted to work for Edison. So he went in there and didn't know anything, but just said, I want to work next year. I'm going to work for free. And eventually he became Edison's CEO and runs the company. And that whole story's in there. That kind of stuff never happens. Like where it's like, very, very, but I think that this is the greatest industry for it, to be an entrepreneur. There's so many things that need to be automated. And a lot of them are companies. Like, that's why most founders in this industry always start something new. That's why I asked you when I saw you last time. I said, "What's your next thing?" Because I know it's going to be something. You're probably just waiting for the right thing, but you're going to,
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about the Thomas Edison story, and it feels like what I'm taking away from that is the idea of instant versus long-term gratification. And you're saying no one ever does that anymore. And I think it's because our ADD brains and just our dopamine addicted brains are so used to being able to get the next hit and get the next instant gratification, whether it's the next scroll on TikTok or whatever, that the idea of putting in long-term work, sacrificing short-term gain, saying, hey, I'll work for you for free just so I can learn from you, someone like Thomas Edison or any type of visionary, and putting in all that time and energy, it doesn't satisfy any of our short-term gratification, dopamine addicted brain. But in the long term, it teaches us the skills to be the kind of next level entrepreneur or CEO that you want to be. So I'm wondering if there's a connection there, and that's maybe why you don't see people doing that. I'm not saying people should go work for free, but investing yourself in learning about something, even if it takes hundreds of hours to learn it, and you're not going to see $1 until you've really mastered it and then applied it and worked hard at it.
That's
like that. That I get.
I did that for a
People
whole
don't do
year
that.
in the Navy. My last year, I just said, I'm going to read every bit. And I did it for like 4 or 5 years. I started my first company. So everything I could, I was so curious. And that's one person said to me, I said, I understand why you're successful. And they said, it's because you ask so many questions. I'm just very curious about how things work. And then, but I think that, yeah, I think that if I, like my mom used to yell at me, she'd be like, because my mom was an extrovert. She'd be like in New York and I'd be on the couch. She's like, what are you doing? And I'd be sitting on the couch. And I'm like, I'm thinking. And she's like, what are you thinking about? I'm like, don't worry about it. And I was really just planning, like, I was working for my dad at the time. I was like, here's what he's doing wrong. And I was just really going deep in everything. And I was so committed to figuring it out. I think that's commitment. Like, just commit yourself. This is the best industry for it, to work your way up and be the CEO of any company. As we are all at the top. We see the guys at the top, and we know, like, this is one of those few industries that anyone could be. And there's so many companies too. But I think, yeah, just planning and then getting better and then learning the skill. If I wanted to be the best CEO or best leader of a company, I wouldn't read Entrepreneur. I'd just read about all the great managers in the country and just get good at it. And then just make it your goal every day when you wake up. And that's actually, there's in the book Think and Grow Rich, there's like, he says in every page of this book, there's the secret of how you become wealthy. And he won't tell you what the secret is. He says you have to explain it to yourself. But I'll let everyone know right now what it is. It's very simple. That's why he won't tell you. But it's envisioning yourself. You just have to picture yourself as there already and live your life like that. So if you want to be a billionaire, you picture yourself as a billionaire. If you want to run a company one day, that's who you are every day you wake up. And then the idea is, though, everything will come into place to make that happen, as long as you believe in that and make that your mission. Just follow that. And if everyone knew that, I think it's such a detriment if you don't understand the laws of attraction, like how that all works. Because I think it truly works. I couldn't believe it when I started seeing it all happen. You could envision your life, and I did. I envisioned my wife. She was a brunette. I got a brunette. Like, it was like I pictured everything, and it happened. And then, yeah. But one thing about these books is they don't teach you spiritual stuff. So I remember I got there, I was like, what the fuck, this is all there is? So then I read a bunch of Buddhist stuff to help that, but that's a whole different story. But yeah, start with that. If anyone wants to read that, read it. But I think it changed my life.
Well, I could say I will be reading it. Whenever I find it in this room, I will pick it up and start reading it. And I will let our audience know my thoughts.
You'll start a company 1 week after you read it. You'll be already voting, because I know you're going to do it, but it'll kick it into gear.
So last topic I want to talk about is just kind of investing, because you are someone who has now with multiple successful startups, you've started to take some of the money you've earned and invest it across our industry. And I'm curious, how do you think about investing? What are you looking for when an opportunity presents itself to you? How do you feel like you're picking a winner?
Yeah, most of my investments only have mostly worked in this industry. I've noticed that you invest in what you know, and I invested. So I own a big portion of Roadrunner, the LTL carrier, and I remember I got a call from that 5 years ago. And if you're in the LTL business, Roadrunner has somewhat of a monopoly on what they do, which is long haul. Don't not that many cross docks LTL trucking. They mainly run team drivers, West Coast, East Coast, and um, it was a very low valuation. It was like $80 million valuation. I'm like, this is crazy. Like those kind of things that you could cite once you know like, this industry. I'm like, obviously they had major problems and bad, former CEO that got convicted for fraud and CFO, but that was all in the past when I invested. And then we brought a new CEO in, named Chris. He's amazing, and and now that company invested 4 years ago. It's doing great, and it's still there, and they're private, so I can't really talk about the numbers, but they
Maybe,
are doing great, and I think
maybe,
that
maybe I'll get Chris on the show sometime. You think?
Chris Jamros, yeah, you love it. The guy he's always posting videos of himself traveling. I'm linked to
Sitting in the middle seat.
Yeah, he loves to show that up. But he's that type of guy. He's got 7 turnarounds under his belt, so it's pretty awesome. And he's got a really awesome story because he actually is the biggest owner of. He could tell you the story, but he's one of the biggest owners of it now. He wasn't the biggest owner last year, so I'm sure he would
Good
love
for him. Yeah, if you'll have to connect me when we get off.
And then I have a company called My Carrier, which is doing an LTL. So the guys, Mike Bookout, I told you, Jet McCandless and Mike Bookout, my top 2 guys at GlobalTrans. And I remember Jet called me like right when he left GlobalTrans and started P44, and he said, "Hey, would you invest in this?" And I said no. I didn't have him. Well, first, I didn't have him that much money then, but I shouldn't have said no because P44 it was like an awesome valuation. I could have got huge win there, but he was just starting, and he wanted to. Back then, it was a crazy valuation, I thought, so I passed on it. And then when Mike called me up, he left GlobalTrans after I left. He was one of my top guys as well there. He did all my LTL carrier management there, so managed all the LTL carriers. And he started something. I was like, let me in. And I went all in with him. So I'm a big shareholder there now. And I'm on the board. What they do is they're the white label. So Old Dominion, Saia, everybody in the United States, all these big LTL carriers go out and give a platform to their shipper and with their white label. So it might say Old Dominion, might say Saia, might say Averitt. It's all the LTL carriers, with the exception maybe FedEx is the only one that doesn't use them. But all the LTL carriers use them and white label their system. So now that shipper can bring in not just Saia, let's say. They could bring in, let's say they have a relationship with Old Dominion. So they're really essentially creating like what Freightquote has and what GlobalTrans has, but for that shipper direct to the carrier. Mm-hmm. And that's a SaaS-based model that carriers pay that. And Mike Bookout's running that. It's doing really well. And then I have a company called eDray. So I picked one in each model. I have an LTL carrier, I have a LTL software, and then I have a drayage. And they're like, eDray is like the first company I ever seen. I invested 5 years ago when they first started. It's over a $10 million company. It's breaking even, which is awesome. Very unheard of in this industry to get break even. And literally, they're just like Transplace for trucking or Transplace. They're managed trans for drayage. And they manage like 5 to 10% of the containers. And then of Emerge, obviously, is my main day to day because I put a lot of my wealth into Emerge. Like I pretty much put all my GlobalTrans into that.
So I appreciate you explaining the ones you're in, but I'm curious more on the thought process. Like as you look at as future opportunities get put in front of you, how are you thinking about whether or not you should invest? Like what are you looking for in today's industry? Where do you think there are areas that still need better technology or better companies? Where does our industry need?
AI is a big thing. I think me and you are in the same investment there. The clone ops are doing great, but AI is like, we all know AI. It's unbelievable. I think AI, even with its current technology, could do 70% of the jobs in the industry, which is scary in itself. It's a whole different discussion. It's going to take years for that to implement. I think if you started a company now, it's much easier to start and then build AI into it. But I think any company, if it was fully using AI, would probably need 70% less people, especially in logistics, which is crazy. So I think AI is just the future. And I think there's going to be multiple winners, not going to be one or two. And there could be specific, like for instance, the guy used to invest, Prasad, who did I'm not investing in it, but he's doing like Q'd, which is it's just appointment scheduling for using AI. So it's like, there's so many little things, but I think AI is just going to do everything eventually. I hate to even say it, but carrier sales, I think, is going to be tough. I think there'll always be carrier sales reps, but I think the carrier sales rep 10 years from now will be managing 50 to 100 loads a day, not, where the AI is doing most of the work and he's managing the exceptions. But there'll always be carrier sales reps, but I think there'll be a lot less of them, unfortunately. I think that's going to be a tough transition for our industry.
I'm so curious. I'm so curious how companies are going to do it. In terms of
a lot of people are against using outbound AI, but I've seen it in action, and it's pretty crazy what it does. And I think the biggest thing that's going to happen in a year is that imagine when the guy with that Aljack's broker has 5 people working for him can now call all 30,000 or 20,000 of his setup carriers every day. Imagine the amount of phone calls that are going to happen. The carriers are literally not going to be able to pick up the phone I would say in a year, because there'll be so many AI calls going to them.
Well, they'll have their own AI answering calls.
Right.
And they're also, I saw Apple's got this thing now where it like tells you in advance. You don't even have to answer the phone to get the information from someone. Like, it tells you on your screen. It's an AI call asking if you have a truck available today. Do you want to answer, or do you want me to? Like, I think we're going to get to a place where the calls aren't even going to be happening. Like the data will be exchanged somehow, through an app or
AI
whatever.
Talking AI eventually. It's going to be their AI. Your AI is going to call the carrier's AI. Your AI is going to know, here's how much we have in the load, just like your carrier sales rep would, and the AI from the carrier is going to do the same. I think there's a huge opportunity for a land grab of who gets the carriers. I mean, for the AI models, that's a big thing. And then, but also it's like, a year from now is that going to hurt the biggest brokers like TQL and CH, because that's what they rely on. Their biggest advantage has always been, we have thousands of carrier sales. We know where every truck is every day, just because we have enough people to call. But once that's taken away, it's going to be a struggle for a lot of the bigger guys. Maybe not so I don't know if he feels this, but I think TQL will be a company like TQL, who's more cradle to grave and more customer service, and smaller shippers might do better at it than, but CH Robinson's, everybody's always thought that they're still the leader. So maybe they'll figure this out, but it's going to be hard for the carrier sales model of the past, where, because think about this, one thing that's never talked about in this industry is how much capacity is eaten up before it even gets to, let's say even at your size at Molo, you guys were maybe big enough to call 4 or 5, maybe 20 carriers in the morning, maybe hundreds of carriers in the morning, but you weren't able to call all the carriers in the morning and find out. But imagine when you could have that same, capability of calling, you're not going to worry about CH Robinson having all these carrier sales reps calling, and then eating up that capacity. Think how much the carriers just wants to move it at $2 a mile. He gets CH, the first call CH, no, TQO. All right, send it over. Boom, gone. That capacity's gone. I would say, I don't know how much capacity gets eaten like that, but a lot does, that they have advantage on. But I think that's going to be spread out. That advantage is going to go away, which is great for everyone else, right? Because now once that carrier could say, I don't need to take this first load given to me from the first carrier sales rep that calls me, I could wait a little longer and maybe get 5 to 10 cents more or 20 cents more if I just wait another hour, 2 hours. And once that digitalizes, I think it's going to be so much better for carriers and for the industry. Maybe not so much for the biggest guys, though, which rely on that advantage.
Yeah, I'm so curious if we get to a place where there's kind of this aggregated data pool that's transparently available to the market, that shows us where the trucks are and what the trucks are looking for on a price on a given lane. I don't know. I mean, it feels like we could get there. If enough of the Happy Robot or FleetWorks, whoever they are, if they're talking every day to all these carriers and then they just start to sell that on the open market of this is who's available today and this is the price they're looking for on a given lane, it's going to be a very different ball game.
It's
I
going to
don't
be
know what
so
that
much
means.
better. I think it'll be so much better for the industry. What's going to hurt though is imagine the RFPs. Right now in the RFPs, you'll see a lane where maybe CH Robinson's cheapest, but the next lane TQL is cheapest, and the next lane Armstrong's cheapest, and so on and so on. And then they'll award each one. But once that's a level playing field. Everybody's going to have to work on. Then it's going to be like, okay, we work on whoever could work the cheapest, right? If I could do it on a 6%, 7% margin, right? And I don't think we're far away from that. I think maybe 5%, but I think it's going to be good overall for the industry because I've always, ever since, even though your dad mastered it, the calling of carriers and managing carriers, the carrier sales rep idea. I just always felt like that's not going to be I thought it'd be gone by now, but it's still there where you need massive carrier sales reps. But I think that goes away in the next 5 years finally. And then carriers all digitalized. You can put your freight out there and they'll be click and buy. You don't have to negotiate. Negotiation will happen with the AI at first, and eventually it'll just happen. And then it's going to be who could service this for the cheapest. And I hate to say this, it's going to go, broker rates are going to go down to, I think 5 years would be 10% on average. I think it's 14% average right now. Overall,
Something like that.
I think it's going to go down to like 11, 12 in the next 5 years. But eventually it's going to be like, if you want this lane, you're going to have to be at 5% margin or 6% margin. Because the rates are everybody knows, like you put your load out there, it's the same carrier. If they buy it from CH, they're going to buy it from TQO. They're going to buy it from, it's like, what happens at that point?
Yeah. The only challenge is going to be, my guess is that the average broker that has a buy it now button or a load board for a carrier to buy freight from without having to talk to a rep, I would say with confidence that any company that has that has more fraud happening on the loads that are digitally bought versus the loads that a carrier rep is involved. And I've heard that from a couple of brokers that validated that, and I can't speak. Well, I'll just leave it at that, because there's less barriers or fewer barriers. If the hacker or fraudster can get your DAT login credentials, they can get your credentials to whatever other tool is being used. They buy the freight without having to talk to someone, and then they're stealing it. So I am curious if that becomes a headwind for this kind of efficiency train that we're moving down, and if it's enough for companies like Highway to just kind of offset that, or if there's going to be an avenue for a newer or additional fraud prevention technology to show up.
It's pretty rampant right now. It's really bad. And then, but I think obviously it could be settled. I mean, if whatever a person could ask the carrier, you could have the AI do.
For sure.
But I think that's where you have people. I mean, like I said, there's always going to be carrier sales reps. Maybe the carrier sales rep, his job is just to make sure that I have 50 loads going to them. Make sure all these carriers are up to par, and maybe 20 of them are new, or 10 of them are new, or something like that. But I don't think it's going to be that's not going to be the biggest headwind to this. I think the biggest headwind is like, when are the carriers going to? I actually can't wait till the carriers are bogged down with the AI calls, so they actually do get digitized. Versus, like I said, I think 50 to 60% of the capacity is gone before the average truck broker calls that carrier. It's all gone. Like, it's all been moved by the carrier. But Chicago called them at 5 a.m. and got that load booked already, secured for TQL or secured for CH or whoever it was. I think I think that it's going to be over. But also, I worry about also little brokers. How are little brokers going to compete 10 years from now when they have to, the margins are all the same. Like right now, they're relying on the fact that they know this market better than your CH Robinson rep does. But when that levels out, that's going to be interesting too.
Yeah, I don't have a ton of confidence in the future of the small broker.
Yeah, it's going to be tough.
We'll see, though.
Yeah, I heard that someone told you, was talking, hey, why don't you start another brokerage? It would be tough right now, right? But I mean, it might not be a bad idea, because like, think about it. If you started a brokerage right now, like you fully AI, like boom, I'm going to start an AI brokerage from start. You don't need hundreds of people anymore. You just need a few. But is where's the industry going? And, how do you differentiate yourself? That's another key. Like no shipper wants to let the brokers in right now because it's very hard to get in anybody unless you what makes you different, so you have to run into that.
Yeah, if I was going to start another broker, I would want to be able to be different somehow. I'd want to be connected. I'd want to be tied into a shipper or tied into assets in the right way or LTI, like something. But just starting a traditional freight broker on its own with no special effects, essentially, I would.
Right.
That would be a lot harder than I want it to be.
Yeah,
So
it would be. But we've always said like it's going to happen. It's a bad time to start. But it's never. Even 5 years ago, I would have said no. It's probably going to be a bad time, but it would have been the right time then too.
Yep.
But
well, listen, this has been great. I appreciate all your insights, hearing your story, learning about how you built GlobalTrans 10-4 and now emerge into the companies they are. And I think my audience will really appreciate all the insights you provided, and certainly the book that we'll all now be reading in the near term. And people can send you their personal feedback and what they learned from it.
Yeah, please do. Please send me feedback. LinkedIn, you can reach me at, and love to hear anybody that has any reaction to it, or love to hear about that. But yeah, thank you, Andrew. I think I'm glad that you and I have become friends over time, and at least I think we got off on the wrong foot. But I think that you're actually the first person ever I said, like, I can't believe I got on the wrong foot with this guy. I usually don't, but then in this industry, I've learned that sometimes the way I talk doesn't make friends at first. But that's always been the case for me. But I'm glad that you and I have got to that point where we could be friends.
You and me both. Yeah, you too, man. All right. Well, with that, we will see you next week.